Well, here we are again. Another night of Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime. I'm Nancy Miller, and if you are new to this podcast, think of Dead Sleep like the pina colada song of true crime podcasts. Come with me and escape from any fretful tossing and turning from your chronic insomnia. And join me in the land of the midnight sun, the happy place, the happiest place, the one we learned a lot about in the previous episode, the one titled The Happiest Hell on Earth. In that happy place, the happiest place in the world, it's the nano-sized Nordic nation of Finland, a country the size of Montana, with a population of 5 million people, where apparently the majority of them claim to be the happiest people in the world. But what really is happiness? That's what many of us spend sleepless nights thinking about. If I only had money, I'd be so much happier. If I were married, I'd be so much happier. If I were single, I'd be so much happier. If I had a job, I'd be so much happier. If I quit my job, I'd be so much happier. If I could sleep, I would be so much happier. In that last instance, that's probably true, but the rest of it all gets very complicated. But in Finland, they keep their definition of happiness pretty simple. Happiness isn't excitement or novelty. It's not money even. The key to Finland's happiness is summed up in the country's unofficial motto. And in Finnish, it sounds something like this. Vankka, vaka, vapaa, which means solid, stable, and free. And that motto in part reflects Finland's history of walking a treacherous tightrope in the geopolitical circus, a decades-long balancing act, especially with your biggest neighbor, the Russian Federation next door, always there, hungry and waiting, like a cage of untamed lions. And it was from the Russians, among other attempts to occupy Finland, that the Finnish developed their philosophy, one we learned a lot about in the previous episode. That word, sisu. That is courage and tenacity in the face of adversity. A celebration of the underdog and having the grit to go out and fight, even if the odds are stacked against you. And with that comes an appreciation for stability and safety and freedom. And there's no better time to feel free than in the summer in Finland. White nights where the sun never sets, and it looks and feels like daytime more or less for 24 hours a day. But in the summer of 2010, life was very dark indeed for a 46-year-old Finnish woman named Anneli Auer, who'd just been found guilty in the murder of her husband, 51-year-old Jukka Lahti. You'll recall from the previous episode that it was late one night, December 1st, 2006, when Anneli claimed that she'd been awoken by the sound of shattered glass. An intruder had broken into the home of Anneli and her husband, Jukka. And within minutes, this unknown attacker, wearing a hoodie and possibly a balaclava, had gone after her husband with a knife, stabbing her husband multiple times. Unexpectedly, however, his cause of death was from blunt force trauma, an object that struck him in the head at least once. Though exactly what caused that fatal blow, a piece of firewood or something even heavier, that makeshift murder weapon, it wasn't at the scene, and it was never found. And right away, this case frustrated high-level authorities in that part of Finland who previously boasted a 100% clearance rate in their homicide cases. One official even crowed there hadn't been an unsolved murder in that area of Finland since the end of the Second World War. Though it was worth remembering, the majority of homicides in Finland were manslaughter cases. They weren't big mysteries. The majority of violent deaths in Finland followed a familiar scenario: a disagreement between two people, usually guys in their 30s who knew each other. One that got so heated that things turned deadly. Often these senseless incidences were fueled by abundant alcohol or abuse of illegal drugs like methamphetamine or a bath salt-style stimulant called flakka. Flakka could cause irrational and violent psychosis. And in those circumstances, where the victim knew their killer, the incident happened in one of their homes or somewhere nearby. And if the perpetrator didn't immediately turn themselves in, there was always someone, a family member, friend, or neighbor who'd come forward, and they'd share what they knew. The Finnish people are known for their forthrightness and honesty, especially within the Finnish criminal justice system, which is known for its integrity, its leniency, prioritizing rehabilitation over punishment. A standard prison sentence in a manslaughter conviction was roughly 2 years. An ambitious overhaul of Finland's penal system in the 1970s led to a whole new philosophy to incarceration. An approach that reflected prisons and their design. Many modern prisons in Finland didn't have bars on their windows, no locked doors. Their prison cells, in some instances, looked like little studio apartments. These incarcerated individuals, they wore their own clothes, cooked their own food, even did grocery shopping at the local market, with community integration a big part of rehabilitation. But in the case of Anneli Auer, her murder conviction and sentencing was far more severe. Life in prison was mandatory for a murder conviction, though it was possible, if Anneli was rehabilitated, she could be released much sooner, even as soon as 12 years. But that was unlikely, because Anneli had little interest in rehabilitation. What she wanted was justice, because she was innocent. Even if no one believed her, and it's fair to say when she was convicted, everyone in Finland believed she was indeed guilty, that she was capable of killing her husband in cold blood. And why wouldn't they? Finland was known all over the world for having one of the most efficient, least corrupt forms of government, including its criminal justice system. This wasn't Russia. And it wasn't something that most Finns were willing to believe, that Anneli Auer, that she could possibly be innocent and found guilty. Besides, the evidence, it spoke for itself. Quite literally. There was that phone call, 4 minutes long, which authorities said proved that Anneli had killed her husband. A 4-minute phone call that Anneli believed would have proven what had happened, that someone had broken into her home, had killed her husband, that she had raced and tried to fetch someone to get help. But instead, that phone call, that audio recording, was the very piece of evidence that was used against her. And as I mentioned in the previous episode, the audio of that recording is available on YouTube. And you honestly don't need to know Finnish to hear that something terrible is happening. But what exactly happened and who was there in the house that night? That was at the center of the investigation and the trial against Anna-Lee. An investigation that by many accounts, in retrospect, seemed a little extreme, maybe a little desperate. Without compelling physical evidence, investigators turned to unorthodox means to generate the intelligence that they needed. This included sending an undercover cop to befriend Anna-Lee and her family. And Anna-Lee and this undercover cop developed a romantic relationship. And this undercover guy, we called him Peter in the previous episode. He was more than some dude in her life. He'd become something of a father figure to her children, particularly her eldest daughter, Amanda, who was 12 years old when he came into their lives. And it was Amanda, as the eldest child, who was the only one who also claimed to have seen the intruder that night, December 1st, 2006. And she, along with her mother, were the sole witnesses in the house. And the other children, who were very young, ranging in ages from 2 years old to 7 years old. At some point amidst all of the chaos, those 3 children were spirited away from the house for their safety, standing outside, apparently unaware of what was happening. The curious thing was that even after all of those months that Peter had spent with Anna-Lee, Amanda, and the rest of the family, he was never able to coax any information out of anyone, any details that were previously unknown in the murder of Jukulahti. Which meant either Anna-Lee was telling the truth, or she and her daughter were very good at keeping secrets. So which one was it? When the case went to trial, which in Finland meant it came before a 3-judge panel, 2 of the 3 judges sided with the prosecution. That there was no evidence that there was anyone else in the house, no fingerprints, no DNA, no blood. And in that phone call, there was no sound of another man's voice, no sound of a killer. Only the sound of one man, that's Jukka, groaning loudly as he dies slowly in the bedroom floor. The only other voices, the fearful, childish pitch of her daughter Amanda, and then back and forth in the house, even from a distance, the voice of Anna-Lee herself. And prosecutors swore, if you listened carefully enough to that recording, you could hear it. You could hear her saying one specific word in Finnish. And that word, they claimed, was die. Anna-Lee was determined to prove this wasn't true. And she was determined she was going to out-Sisu these mofos, and she would prove that they did not have enough evidence against her, and that that phone call was insufficient. And that, for her, was the starting point, as she dedicated the next several months to 2 things: cracking law books to see if she could get herself an appeal, and writing letters to her children, her only real connection to the outside world. Because the truth was, Finland could try and make prisons feel humane and homey, but for Anna-Lee, home was where her 4 children were. And being without them, it was worse than a life sentence in prison. It was pure torture. And she had to reunite with her kids before they forgot her, before it was too late. Around the time of Annalie's arrest, her 4 children went to live with Annalie's brother and his wife, who agreed to serve essentially as the kids' foster parents, an arrangement that Annalie believed would have been temporary. Back in 2009, when she was arrested, she was quite confident that she could clear this whole thing up. At the time, she was like everyone else in Finland. She truly believed in the criminal justice system, and that if she were innocent, they'd clear it up quickly. But that's not what happened. The arrangement was proving permanent, and she'd grown concerned, some might say paranoid, that her brother and his wife were trying to replace her. She noticed her younger children, they seemed to treat her like a distant aunt, not a mother. And she could only hope that her brother was being clear with these children that their mother was innocent. She hadn't killed their father. And she did her best to stay in touch, have them visit, but she sensed they were slipping away, which fueled Annalie's necessity for an appeal. In the meantime, she wrote her children letters. She had fun making little drawings. In one of the drawings, which was dated on St. Patrick's Day, it was an ornate heart shape. It resembles like a Celtic heart. And the size and shape of this drawing, she joked, apparently, that it would make one day a great tattoo. And maybe she'd get this tattoo while in prison. Something to that effect, a variation on that idea. Something she would think about much, not at the time, but that would play a certain amount of significance later. In a way, she would never have anticipated. Annalie was focused on her case and how she was going to prove her innocence. And by 2011, she'd filed for an appeal, stating that she did not think the prosecution had enough evidence, that phone recording from the emergency dispatcher wasn't sufficient, and that the case should be reviewed again with fresh eyes. And in the spring of 2011, a higher court agreed, and much to just about everyone's surprise, they sided with Annalie, stating that the original case, the prosecution did not have enough evidence against Annalie. The whole prosecution had gotten things backwards, that they had to prove her guilt. It wasn't Annalie having to prove her innocence. And while that might sound nuanced or naive, it was inherently true. They had no evidence of Annalie doing it. What they had was the absence of someone else. They had to find substance to what would make her guilty. What was Annalie's motive? That was never clear. How exactly did she kill her husband? That was also unclear. They had the knife, but what was the actual weapon? That heavy object that killed Yuka. And how would she have staged a crime scene in such a short amount of time? Until they could figure out the answers to these questions, this conviction wouldn't stand. So they overturned this murder conviction, and Annalie, soon enough, was free to go. So she'd done it. She'd really done it. She'd overturned her conviction and was on her way to see her family and get her kids back. But there was something that Annalie was unaware of. That her prison nightmare was, for now, over. But what Annalie didn't realize was that the hell of her real life was about to begin. Because police were far from done with Annalie and the murder of Yuka. And they'd soon discover they didn't even have the whole story. Not even close. Because it turns out there was someone else there that night, December 1st, 2006. There was a witness there that night. Someone who said they saw and heard everything. And the story they told, it was a lot different than the story Annalie and Amanda told. And in this version of events, the devil was in the details. Annalie knew something was up. When she was released from prison, naturally the first thing she did was reach out to her brother and try and arrange an opportunity to meet up as soon as possible. She was eager, desperate, to hug and kiss and be with her kids again, only to find out her big dreams of reunion wouldn't happen. Her brother and his wife had taken her children on a vacation. Well, they'd taken 3 of the 4 children on a vacation, on some type of boating excursion, and who knew when they'd be back. The child that was left behind was Amanda. By then, Amanda was a teenager, and she decided within the first few months of living with her uncle and his wife that this arrangement wasn't going to work out. The uncle, according to Amanda, he had a lot of rules, and he was, in her mind, weirdly religious. And on top of that, he didn't seem as sympathetic to her mother and her situation as he should be. And in short order, Amanda defected, preferring to stay in a group home for girls rather than live with her uncle. Now, the other kids, they were younger, and to be fair, they didn't have the trauma that Amanda had, of people thinking of her mother as a killer, as a liar, when Amanda knew what she saw that night. And the other kids, they hadn't seen or heard a thing. And that was good for them, but it made for an uncomfortable situation. Amanda and her mother were still close, and Amanda was loyal to Annalie. And so when she got out of prison, of course, Amanda was eager to see her. But Amanda, sadly, had to inform her mother that she and her other 3 siblings, they were no longer close. And perhaps Annalie, thinking that now she was out of prison, she would be able to smooth things over if she was their mom after all. If that's what she'd hoped for, she would be swiftly and sorely mistaken. Because soon after she was released from prison, her brother called the police, and he told them that he was very worried that his sister was now out on the streets. And he let investigators know that he had some information they might be interested in having. Witness testimony that what happened that night wasn't as Annalie and Amanda claimed. And it just so happened that this uncle, Annalie's brother, he had it all on tape. Annalie's brother told police that when he took the children in, they began to trust him. And when they did, they began to tell him things. And one of the things that he learned was that Annalie's son, who was roughly 7 years old when this whole terrible thing happened, well, he had vivid memories. Memories that might have been buried for far too long, but memories nonetheless that had surfaced when living with the uncle and his wife. And in those memories, the son remembered that Amanda wasn't the only one who'd seen something and heard something that night. He had too. Only in this case, what he heard was his mother and his sister plotting the murder of his dad. And upon further questioning, the boy also revealed that not only had they staged the scene, they'd done the whole murder hours earlier. And the boy heard it while it was happening, and along with the sound of his father being killed, he heard a clicking sound. And that click sound was a cassette tape being put into a boombox. And the boombox was used to record the whole murder. And the whole scheme was to call the emergency dispatcher and then play that tape into the phone so it sounded like it was happening in real time. So the dispatcher would think that this murder had just happened, was happening, when in fact it had taken place hours earlier. And his sister helped his mother make sure that there was no incriminating evidence pointing to them. He swore what he saw and heard, it was true. Now, authorities recognized the boy was only 7 years old at the time of this murder. And here they were, 5 long years later, and he was suddenly proffering up memories of things he saw and heard that had never been mentioned before. And this whole cassette tape and the pre-recording, it was far-fetched. But at the very least, what he was saying, as far-fetched and complicated as it was a bit of flint. A way to reignite this investigation and offer them an opportunity to get Annalie back in court. Possible new evidence. Because they knew she was guilty. They just needed a way in. A reason to revisit that audio recording, the one that she'd made, to the authorities and see, were there any clicks? Was there something there? Could they prove that somehow that phone call and the sound of Yuka in the background, had it been manipulated? Could they prove that it had been pre-recorded? The scenario was convoluted, but if they could prove it was plausible, they could get the thing they needed, a conviction, one that would stick. But wait, there was more, the uncle said. He had evidence that his sister was not only a killer, she was also a twisted, sadistic Satanist. This was not the uncle's opinion. This came from the children themselves. The little boy said that every year on the anniversary of their father's death, up until his mother's arrest, they would celebrate the death of their father by playing with his ashes. And that was just one ritual. There were many more. Even more dark, more twisted, more demonic. His mother and her boyfriend at the time, a guy that she dated for about a year after Yuka's death and just before Peter. The little boy said his mother and this man, they both engaged in ritualistic satanic worship. And this included the sacrifice of both animals and children. Now, I won't keep you in suspense here. And many of us know where this is all going. That accusations of ritualistic animal and child abuse in the name of Satan That's something we've seen here in the United States before. The most famous case here in the States was the McMartin preschool child abuse scandal that began in 1983 in Manhattan Beach, California. And we tend to refer to it as satanic panic. But it's important to note that it took years for that particular case of alleged ritualistic satanic child abuse to make its way through the courts, and years for the truth to come to light. That none of the things that these children said happened, none of it was true. It was coaxed out of these children in an interest to please the adults around them. And it would be the same thing with this case, that this accusation of ritualistic child abuse, her children would come out later, much later, and admit that it wasn't true. But it would take a long time for that to be revealed. And in the meantime, Annalie and her partner at that time, during this alleged abuse, they were brought up on charges of serious child abuse. And not long after Annalie was released, she was arrested again, only this time for these unspeakable, untrue crimes. So why would her own brother set her up like this? Assuming, of course, that he knew these accusations were false and aware that he even encouraged these statements. According to Annalie and other reports, her brother earned roughly 9,000 euros. That's around 10 grand a month in US dollars to take care of her children. And if you believe Annalie, her brother didn't want that gravy train to come to a stop. From the point of view of her brother, however, he, it seems, was just trying to help. He truly believed that Annalie had killed her husband. And as time went on and these children started telling these stories, he didn't question whether or not they were true. And he also seemed unaware of how he might be leading the children into telling these stories. The truth was that these children, they found their uncle to be very strict, and they noticed that whenever they said something about the murder or made some type of comment about the past, he'd reward them with good food to eat, along with other little signals of approval that he might not have even been aware of. And so the kids started telling stories as a way of getting stuff. And in their mind, their mother was in the distant past. They were so young when this all happened. And what Annalie was afraid of, it appears it was true. That her brother had let her children believe that she had indeed killed their father. Maybe he believed it too. Whatever the case, when she was released early in 2011 with that overturned conviction, her children weren't relieved. They were scared. And when they told these tales to their uncle, they didn't think they'd be taken so seriously. That by the time that it went to investigators, these children who were so young were so scared to tell the truth that they'd made it up, they just kind of kept it going. And ironically, it was Peter, the undercover cop, who was a reliable source in Annalie's defense. That the entire time that he knew her, and he'd spent an inordinate amount of time with her and her children, he never saw any abuse. He was clear that Annalie was a great mother. But his opinion, it wasn't enough. What's more, the prosecution found an expert in Satanism and the occult to testify that there was evidence that Annalie was indeed connected in one way or another to the occult, including that disturbing devil tattoo. In this expert's opinion, the drawing, the one of the ornate Celtic-style heart that she sketched for her children and joked she would get a tattoo of, that sketch was apparently a symbol of satanic worship. And if one looked closely, you could also see evidence of satanic ritual in the murder of Jukka Lahti. Revisiting those crime scene photos, one could clearly see that the marks, the knife wounds on his body, they were X shapes, the shape of the cross. Now, prosecutors would later say they didn't really put that much weight into this satanic expertise, but it was enough to damage Annalie's character, if not in the courtroom, then most certainly in the press. As if being a killer wasn't bad enough, she was now a Satan-worshipping child abuser. An opinion about Annalie that was proven, more or less, when she and her partner were convicted on those child abuse crimes. And she was sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, and her ex-partner, he got 10 years. And so it's complicated. But by 2013, with Annalie in prison for this horrible abuse case, they were able to get her back into court with a second trial in the murder of her husband. And here, once again, that recorded phone call to the dispatcher was the key point of evidence. And this time, they were examining this phone call to see if they could hear the possibility that the original audio recording of Jukka dying was previously recorded and later manipulated. The thing was, they'd had this tape analyzed by several sources, including the FBI. And when the FBI studied the dispatcher's recording, it was inconclusive. They could not find any evidence of any clicks or any possibility that there was a cassette tape being played over that phone call. So the FBI's findings were inconclusive, but there were other experts in Finland who would say that they knew for a fact that the audio was manipulated. And there were those hired by the defense that would claim the opposite. So at least from the outside, it didn't appear that they had any new explosive evidence that was a slam dunk for the prosecution. And yet, once again, somehow, Annalie was found guilty. And once again, she was sentenced to life in prison for the murder of her husband, Jukka. And for many who believed Annalie was guilty, this was the incredible Finnish judicial system at work. But Annalie, she was determined to prove her innocence once again. The question now was, did she have enough sisu left in her to fight this thing? And so it was with one last push that she tried for yet another appeal. And the odds were slim. But somehow, Annalie was able to get this second conviction in front of yet another higher court. And, much to everyone's surprise, yet again, they overturned that conviction. And this time in 2015, that was going to be it. And this higher court decided Annalie was not guilty. She would not be tried again, not in this murder case. And the recommendation was for authorities to start all over again, reboot the whole investigation. And as of now, Anneli is considered innocent, at least in the court of law. Public opinion, that's different. And if you ask people today, it is as divided as Karen Reed. There are people who are staunch supporters of Anneli and others who think that she got away with not only murder, but also child abuse. In the past 10 years, Anneli has worked to clear her name on both counts. It was in 2023 when her children, now adults, admitted that what they'd said was untrue. In light of those statements, in 2024, a high court did overturn that conviction and ordered a retrial. Though Anneli had already served the time for that conviction. And that is the greatest tragedy. Anneli missed years with her children. And those kids, now adults, grew up without a mother or a father. And it took time, but one by one, each child has reconnected with Anneli. And slowly, they're trying to rebuild the relationship and make up for lost time. But the trust between Anneli and the Finnish government, particularly the police department, the prosecution, and the whole apparatus of criminal law, that trust will never be rebuilt. Anneli was financially compensated for all of the trouble that she went through with those murder convictions. And for the many Finns who believe she's guilty, this compensation was an outrage. And even now, there are lingering questions, such as, why? Why would Finnish authorities go to such great lengths to convict Anneli Auer if they knew she was innocent? There's no apparent evidence of any grand conspiracy against Anneli Auer. But there is a strong suggestion of groupthink, a collective desire to win a criminal case at all costs, a priority of victory over justice. And that's certainly not unique to Finland. And one of the reasons why it's considered Finland's crime of the century, well, was because it took a really long time, and it's still ongoing. But it also shifted the perspective of a fair number of Finnish people. And it was this case and the actions of these seemingly well-intentioned authorities that opened a lot of people's eyes in Finland, that made them question, really, for the first time, that maybe their government and their systems didn't entirely have it right. And with any system, a certain amount of skepticism is healthy, as is making people accountable for their mistakes. Which leads us back to the original investigation of what happened the night that Yuka died, and the steps or missteps that took place soon after, beginning from the first moments at that crime scene, along with other details, clues, evidence, and people who were overlooked in favor of pointing the finger at Anneli. And honestly, who knows? Maybe they are right. Maybe she did get away with murder. Because what's the alternative? It is statistically improbable that some stranger would break into someone's house and kill them for no reason. I said improbable, not impossible. Because it does happen. In April of 2025, a 32-year-old Finnish woman was in her home, alone, playing an online video game with a friend who lived in England, when, out of nowhere, a brick smashed through one of her windows. and a man she apparently didn't know was suddenly in her house, yelling at her in Finnish, then attacking her with a knife. And similar to the case of Jukalahti, there was someone there, witnessing the whole thing, powerless to stop it. And in this case, it was her friend, a gaming buddy, who lived all the way in England. And it was the friend who alerted police that he believed his friend had been murdered. And soon after, when the police found her, they discovered what happened to her killer. After committing that horrific act, the man drove 30 miles north, found someone's barn, went inside the barn, and set it ablaze. Witnesses recalled being horrified as the man staggered out, still on fire, and he later died in the hospital as a result from those serious injuries. The strangest part was that authorities could find no connection between this man and his victim. This was indeed a senseless, pointless, random murder. And police believe the only reason why she was chosen was because she just happened to have her light on, and her house just happened to be the closest to the road. But why? Why, in the happiest country in the world, would someone want to kill someone for no reason? That remains a mystery, as does the murder of Jukalahti. At least for now, at least for tonight. But there's always tomorrow. Thank you, as always, for listening to Dead Sleep True Crime for Bedtime, and thank you for making me the happiest podcaster in the world. I'll be back next week with an all-new episode. Be sure to follow the show so you don't miss it. Until then, hu va jute and nighty-night.